Welcome to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 I'm Debra Sloss, producer and host, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. My pronouns are she, her. Cinema is more than entertainment. It can be a window into our emotions, our relationships, and our sense of self. Films can give us a way to make meaning of our experiences and see our lives from a new perspective. In this episode, we'll explore the healing power of cinema and look at how stories on screen can influence the way we understand ourselves and relate to others. We'll also take a closer look at the psychological mechanisms that can make certain films deeply transformative. These influences can be especially powerful during childhood and adolescence, and we'll learn more about why that is. Joining me for this conversation is Yalda T. Uhls. Dr. Uhls is the founder of UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers, a leading organization bridging developmental science with entertainment and media creation. A former senior executive at MGM and Sony Pictures, she now collaborates with studios, streaming platforms, and gaming companies to bring research-based insights into storytelling and youth-focused content. Dr. Uhls is an internationally recognized expert on media's impact on adolescent development and the author of Media Moms and Digital Dads. Throughout the program, we'll also be hearing from 6 individuals from our community who share personal reflections about movies that had a meaningful impact on their lives. Their stories illustrate how a single scene, line, or character can stay with us for years, sometimes helping us understand ourselves or our relationships in new ways. One of these stories is mine. Welcome to State of Mind, Dr. Uhls.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're delighted you're here. Dr. Uhls, I want to start because you've spent years studying the relationship between storytelling, media, and human development. From a psychological perspective, what is it about movies that makes them so powerful for shaping how we feel, think, and understand ourselves?
It's interesting because actually, the study of media impact is often in the communications field, and they have theories such as transportation, which means you are emotionally engaged with the content, identity, you connect your identity with the characters. And I always felt it had a psychological impact. So when I applied to get my PhD, I really wanted to be in a psychology program. And I was lucky enough to get into Dr. Patricia Greenfield's lab at UCLA. And in terms of what I think is the reason that movies and stories really do connect with the human behavior and shift in attitudes and shift in the ways that we feel emotions is because they connect us with meaning and purpose. And especially as a young person, when you're thinking about trying to figure out who you are, and most of your life, if you are one of the more privileged child, you have been with your family and in your neighborhood and with your teachers and your community. And these are all in-person, smaller communities. And stories allow us to connect with people beyond our immediate community and connect with people that may be very different than us, but also very similar than us. And so when a young person is really thinking about who they are, trying to make meaning about their purpose, trying to think about, am I a smart kid or am I a this kid? A story really can connect to them. So it's particularly powerful for teens and young adults. And actually, that's why I launched the center, because that's our focus.
Wonderful. Many of us can remember a movie that stayed with us long after we first viewed it. Why can cinematic stories sometimes reach people emotionally in ways that everyday conversations or even therapy sometimes can't?
Because it's a story, because it's not necessarily meant to teach you something. They do teach you. They can teach you both positive and negative things, but stories are you're wrapped up emotionally in the story, hopefully, and you sort of your defense mechanisms go down. One metaphor people say for stories is the Trojan horse. You know, the message is hiding inside of the packaging, and because you're focused on the packaging and the story and the character, the message just you internalize it almost subconsciously. Now that doesn't actually happen to very young people. Under it takes like till the age of 14 usually for a young person to really sort of understand these stories. There might be a deeper learning or a moral. So it isn't necessarily something that every young person will pick up in the way that an adult looks at the content, but that we will, because we're very engaged with what's happening in the story. You just don't have those defense mechanisms. There's a great piece of research I love done by Sheila Murphy at USC, where she tested the impact of two different pieces of content. One was an 11-minute fictional story, and one was an 11-minute documentary. And they had the same information in each, but the documentary was like scary statistics and doctors. And at the end of watching both of these videos, different groups, they had the same amount of information. She did a test, everybody picked up on the information exactly the same. But 6 months later, she went back and tested who had changed their behavior. The message within these videos was to go and get tested for cancer of the cervix and get pap smears. And the women that had seen the fictional story went at a much greater rate to get their pap smear. So that story had just really resonated with them and changed their behavior much more than a documentary or an expert.
It kind of speaks to the power of personal testimony, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Throughout today's program, we'll be hearing from 6 community members sharing stories about films that stayed with them. We begin with Melanie, who reflects on what it meant to see emotions brought vividly to life in Inside Out 2, and how stories like this can help us better understand our inner worlds. Here's Melanie.
When I watched Inside Out 2, a movie about human emotions, with my 4-year-old cousin, she was in the theater eating snacks. Well, sitting next to her, I was crying. Growing up, I did not know how to handle my emotions because I didn't have anyone to talk to about my feelings. My parents just dismissed them. So, I've had to figure it out on my own. Inside Out 2 navigates Riley, the main character's complex emotions as she enters her teenage years, causing new emotions like anxiety to clash with her original feelings of fear and sadness. Riley struggles with her identity and how to fit into the social world. So this film is centered on how learning to accept those emotions can help individuals grow and navigate change, especially mental health challenges. This movie reminded me how these feelings impacted me as a young, developing child. However, watching Riley being able to navigate a hard time in her life while accepting that these emotions were normal, I realized how far I have come in my own mental health journey. I also realized how other young children continued to struggle in silence. This is one of the reasons why I have a passion and drive to learn psychology. I want to help and teach others that we can heal when we are emotionally aware, but vulnerable too. I'm especially interested in supporting the youth populations in my own community of East Los Angeles, a city of low-income immigrant families. Inside Out 2 is one of the ways I first noticed how my healing started. The movie taught me that the emotions I feel are valid and that I need to advocate for myself. So, even if my little cousin saw this as a fun movie with many different characters, I saw it as a reflection of my own healing journey. That is the beauty of healing through cinema, because it can showcase our personal stories and parts of us that we can grow from. I was able to grow from the parts of myself that I felt I had to suppress, allowing me to see my own struggles be reflected on a movie screen and feel less alone. I often did not have the language to explain my emotions, but I have come to understand them and look into the shared moments, similar to Riley's, that helped me with my own self-reflection.
Thanks, Melanie. Dr. Uhls, when you hear this story, what strikes you about the impact on Melanie of seeing her emotions brought to life on screen?
I love that Melanie, first of all, recognized that maybe her cousins didn't necessarily have the same impact. It sort of speaks to each age and stage has different connections to a story, which is another reason the Center for Scholars and Storytellers exists, is to try to teach storytellers in particular that developmentally, if you're making a story for a certain age, you have to think about how they're learning. But what struck me about this is she's a Latina girl, very smart, clearly very dedicated young girl that's in East Los Angeles. And she related to this character who is a white, upper middle class character in San Francisco. And it was really about the emotional journey that this character was going through and, you know, being a teenager and sort of validating all of the things that the character and Melanie went through herself. We know Meg LaFauve, who was one of the writers, and she worked with psychologists to make sure that she really thought through the developmental science and how young people think about emotions. And she also had a group of young girls, lived experience girls, that she ran things by. So the work she did clearly resonated. It was a huge box office hit. But more importantly, like Inside Out 1, I think it'll sustain and be used for years to come by many people to connect to the mental health journey of this teenager.
So what can happen when someone, especially a young person, sees their inner chaos organized by a story or a film?
It can help them organize their own inner chaos into a story. There is a lot of research, and I'm sure you know it, about narrative identity, about really building a narrative around your identity and who you are. And that work can make you feel better, or at least feel more centered in who you are, because it's organizing. Our brains are developed to, you know, try to find cause and effect, to try to find patterns, which ultimately is what a story is about. It's a theory. It's a theory about why X happened to this person or that person. It takes you to a place. You can model things like resilience and persistence. And, you know, if someone is born into difficult circumstances and is not sure why, and they see a story about a character who is similar to them, but then ends up in a place where they're strong and powerful, that can give them hope, the viewer hope that that can happen to them, or help them make meaning of things that they've done, not only the trauma they went through, but also their resilience and their own power. So stories are how we make meaning in our own world. We tell ourselves stories all the time. We all have inner scripts, all sorts of things. But by seeing other people's stories and seeing these stories that hopefully model hope and resilience, it can help the viewer also feel hope when they normally may not feel that way, and also feel that maybe there's meaning in what they've gone through.
Our next story comes from Shep, who reflects on a recognition that didn't fully land until years after seeing the film, The Women. Sometimes the meaning of a story unfolds slowly, revealing itself long after the credits roll. Here's Shep.
Hi, My name is Shep. About 10 years ago, I was listening to a podcast that was talking about having a queer identity watershed moment, and unfortunately, I cannot remember the podcast for you. They talked about a time in which you saw somebody representing what one day you might look like, even if you didn't quite realize it at the time. This could be in real life or in a movie. I had this aha moment recalling a movie I'd fallen in love with when I was about 10. This movie, by all accounts, was not a very good movie, but what matters is how it made me feel and the ways in which it showed and represented something that became meaningful for me later in life. This movie, called The Women, has a lesbian couple in it. As a 10-year-old, I was entranced by them. I thought they were so cool, yet at the time, I didn't really know why. Fast forward about 10 years to when I'm listening to this podcast. And at that moment, I realized what was so powerful about the movie was that it was the first time I was drawn to queer representation and saw something in the media that represented a critical part of who I am. I think about that movie a lot now, every time I see another movie or TV show that represents the queer experience or a queer character. I wonder who might be watching something like that and having a similar experience. And I thought about it the whole time I was watching the show Heated Rivalry this month, which is a new queer romance HBO series. I find that these pieces of cinema elicit an ineffable collection of complex emotions that are part of the grief and joy of being queer. And within all of those is the powerful experience of being seen. As humans, we need to feel that our experiences are not anomalies and that there's validity to what we feel and who we are. Those reflections may come through community, an attuned therapist, witnessing a stranger on the street, and even through music or cinema. Those reflections really matter because they are part of the meaning-making and coherent narrative development processes essential to healing. The reality is, there are still so many forces at play trying to erase the stories and people whose experiences contradict the powers that be. Cinema can push back. It can illuminate, reflect, and honor. And a piece of cinema just might be the reflection that someone deeply needs.
Thanks, Shep. So for Shep, there's a moment here of recognition that came years later. What do you make of that delayed aha?
I think that speaks to the developmental trajectory that we talked about, that a young person may see something and feel it, but may not understand it. Remember, I talked to you about how morality and morals, it takes a while to sort of recognize, oh, I'm supposed to be learning something, and here's what it means. So, a 10-year-old kid is still is at a different phase in their life and may not understand everything in the film, but may feel certain things. So it's pretty developmentally normal that at different ages and stages you kind of understand different things. But that doesn't mean it doesn't impact you. It doesn't mean it doesn't shape you. I mean, that happens to me not just with stories, but with all sorts of things. There are things, something that somebody said to me, and at the time, it certainly impacted me, but later on, it becomes part of my story as to why I recognized something or shifted my behavior. That person said that, and then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, they're right. I should do X. And that kind of thing can happen in a story.
And what role does representation play in identity formation, and why is it so important?
Well, we talked about that before, that representation plays a huge role in identity formation. I don't know where Shep grew up or where what her environment or their environment was like. But I do, if they had not been exposed to a lesbian couple or any, but in the past, they saw this movie and this really showed them there was another way of being that resonated for them. So it allows, I've heard Hunter Schafer, who was on Euphoria, trans female, talk about how she found out that about trans identity. She always thought she was gay. She thought she was at the time, she thought she was, guy who liked guys. But when she watched YouTube and she learned that, some people were trans, she ended up realizing, oh, I'm actually a female, and had gender dysphoria and was able to transition. So that can happen through seeing a character or learning more about these possibilities that you may not learn about in your immediate environment. One of the reasons I launched the center is I believe that Glee, the TV show Glee, really shifted support for LGBTQIA plus people. This is, and it's been documented that the shift in representation of same-sex couples has really, from the 50s on to today, to heated rivalry, which was a new iteration of this kind of representation, really has shifted hearts and minds. And the time that Glee was on the air, and it had a character named Kurt who was gay and had to sort of go through that with Kurt's dad, and his dad, struggled, but then ended up, loving his kid. And Kurt was not a stereotypical gay kid. He didn't speak in a stereotypical way. He was incredibly handsome and sweet and cute. So he's very likable. And during that time, unconscious bias towards LGBTQ plus people dropped 13%. And that's when the Marriage Equality Act passed. So I believe that show and other shows like it really shifted hearts and minds to understand love is love. And it ended up making a real change in the world.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Debra Sloss. Today, we're exploring the healing power of cinema, how stories told on screen can shape our emotions, identity, and relationships, and why certain films can have a lasting psychological impact. We've been hearing stories from community members about films that stayed with them to shape their lives. Joining us for this conversation is Dr. Yalda T. Uhls, founder of UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers and an internationally recognized expert on media's impact on youth and adolescent development. Next, we hear from Carolyn, who describes how watching The Princess and the Frog sparked a new sense of possibility about who she might become. Sometimes the characters we see on screen help us imagine futures we hadn't yet considered for ourselves. Here's Carolyn.
Hi, my name is Carolyn, and the Disney classic The Princess and the Frog taught me a lot. Watching this movie as a little kid made it seem magical, like all Disney movies. As I got older, I rewatched the film and realized its deeper meaning. In this film, Tiana, the main character, never sets out to find love. In fact, she wants quite the opposite. Tiana has a dream, one that she grew up sharing with her father. Her dream was to work very hard every day of her life in order to open her own restaurant. At the beginning of the movie, as she grows up, we see Tiana face financial hardships, but she continues to thrive through working double shifts night and day despite the challenges thrown her way. Her struggles only push her to work harder in life. This corresponds with my life as a low-income student who dreams of thriving at a university. From a young age, I learned that my family was not well off, that we were quite far from that. Although I never let my parents know, I tried my best not to be a financial strain on them. Growing up, I limited what I wanted versus what I needed. Through Tiana, I learned more about the value of hard work. I learned that if I tried hard enough, I could reach the stars and have endless possibilities. As I continue my journey to become a transfer student to a university, I try to remind myself, as Tiana saying, I am almost there, and that everything in my life is just the beginning. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. So Carolyn's story feels full of drive and possibility. What do you hear happening psychologically when someone adopts a character as a model for their own future?
There's psychologists talk about possible selves um, as this way where part of identity development as you start to figure out and understand who you can be. I think that Carolyn's watching this movie, but again, developmentally, it happened as she was later. She watched it when she was younger, didn't pick up on the meaning, and did it later. Um, she realizes that she has possibilities, even though she came from a world where she didn't think there were possibilities, and there may not have been any immediate role models for her showing this. And in fact, so many people talk about a movie or a book telling them and showing them what kind of careers are out there and inspiring them about what they could do.
So, how can stories like this help shape a sense of who we might someday become?
They can shape um, by providing you hope, by providing, um, by modeling a pathway, but also not modeling a pathway. And I think we're going to talk about this, but not modeling a pathway necessarily that's oh, I met the guy and I fell in love and that we lived happily ever after, really putting true barriers that the character has to go through, but at the same time, um, modeling that it's possible. Um, it and showing concrete steps. I mean, honestly, sometimes, and now, not just movies and TV, there's um plenty of videos on YouTube that can tell you and show you how to get to somewhere from where you are. And you may not have anyone in your life who could tell you that, but you see it in a story, or you see it with a character, or you see it with someone you relate to, and all of a sudden it seems possible.
I love that. And I love that you hint at exploring more how simplified or idealized narratives can shape the expectations we carry about success, love, or overcoming hardship, especially when real life is often more complex or nuanced. Can you speak some to that?
Yeah, we did a study like maybe 5 years ago. We looked at the top 10 TV shows that were targeted to young people. And we looked at representation of class and race. And what we found, we were really, and we were sort of looking for these tropes that were in these stories, like pull yourself up from the bootstraps and things that, storytellers often put into a story that, have worked in the past and seem very inspiring. What we found that was very interesting was that the trope of pulling yourself up with your bootstraps or the American dream was represented at a much, much higher rate for characters of color than white characters. So you saw a lot of characters who were of color, who had become doctor, had become, but started with nothing. And the problem with this, and we know that the storytellers who were probably often white and maybe male were not writing these characters to sort of make their audience feel bad. They were hoping to inspire them. But the problem with those kinds of narratives is if you are, you come from a different class or a different race, there are these systemic barriers to you doing what somebody who doesn't have those barriers um, do. So, and if those aren't shown in the stories, then it can backfire and make that person feel really bad. Like that character was able to do it. How come I can't do it? And if you don't see, like, for example, for somebody who has to go to school and they live 2 hours from the school that has more resources and they have to take a bus there every morning and they take a bus there every night, they might have to take care of their siblings. They don't have parents that are going to help them learn how to study or do their homework. There's so many barriers for underprivileged, marginalized communities. And if they're not portrayed in these sort of aspirational stories, it could backfire and make them feel bad. If there is a more nuanced story that actually shows some of those barriers and how the character persisted or, felt more comfortable with where they are, that might be actually more impactful in a young person than this sort of aspirational, perfect, shiny thing that isn't realistic.
Our next story comes from Lillian, who shares an interaction she saw in the film The Perks of Being a Wallflower that reminds us how a single line from a film can stay with us for years, sometimes becoming an important guiding principle as we navigate life's many challenges. Here's Lillian.
Hi, my name's Lillian. Perks of Being a Wallflower is a romantic drama movie that came out in 2012, right when I started high school. It's a classic coming-of-age story about a high school freshman named Charlie who's trying his hardest to make friends while still dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma. In the movie, Charlie struggles to see his sister, his best friend, and his crush all become entangled in unhealthy relationships. He asks his favorite teacher why nice people choose the wrong people. His teacher, played by the ever charming Paul Rudd, says, "We accept the love we think we deserve." That line, so succinctly put and so heartwarmingly delivered, is a motif that resonates in my head as I go through life experiences that we all go through at one time or another. The kind that make you wonder why we, miraculous yet profoundly ridiculous human beings, act the way that we do. We accept the love we think we deserve. That single sentence is both an explanation and a lesson that nurtures not judgment, but compassion. It beckons the question, why does this person think they deserve this love or lack thereof? Why do they accept this treatment that we would never wish for them and yet they still swallow? We often blame victims and survivors as being at fault for tolerating abuse. We see them as delusional, naive, flawed, or weak. But that line about how we accept what we think we deserve shifts that victim-blaming lens, making me wonder what could have happened to cause this person to believe they're worth anything other than compassion. It encourages me to look past the surface of someone's behavior and to show that they do deserve a better love. As an adoptee and someone who tries to engage in the broader adoption community, I've seen how hard it is for adoptees to reconcile the compassion we deserve as just a basic human right with the wound of having been denied that love when we were given up. Adoptees and so many other people want to give and give and give to somehow own that love that should have been ours from the beginning. But as a character points out in the movie, you can't just put everyone else's needs above your own and call that love. It's cheesy, but you have to love yourself just as much because your potential is infinite too.
Thank you, Lillian. There's something so tender in Lillian's story. What do you think is important about what's happening emotionally for her? And why might a line from the film, like the one she mentions, "We only accept the love we believe we deserve," have so much power for her?
He was, very, very well put, very, very well spoken. I think that, as a therapist, I know you know these things that we often recreate in our future relationships, the relationships we grew up with, even if they were abusive or lacked real connection, because that was our model for love. And that's something we all need to think about and reflect on our patterns and actively think about to change. Because otherwise, if you just sort of go from relationship to relationship, you may never really understand what didn't work in the first one, and also that it wasn't your fault.
So, what changes inside someone when a story like the one that Lillian talks about helps her move from feeling less than to more acceptance and from blaming themselves to treating themselves with more compassion?
I mean, hopefully that increases self-esteem, that increases love for oneself, and self-compassion, as you said. I think we all have voices in our head that are critiquing us and talking to us and saying, "Why'd you do it that way? You should have done it this way. You should dress this way." And, but we would never do that with a friend. So the more that we can sort of see a character think about and talk about, and perhaps a mentor type character on screen, helping a young person understand that the way that they're acting um, is not necessarily doesn't mean they're bad. We did some consulting on a show called Spiderwick Chronicles around mental health, and what the character from the book and the writer director of the series, there's a boy who in the show who has really oppositional defiant disorder, is constantly like acting out, he's lying, and he's got a twin brother who's perfect and a sister who's perfect, and he and his family move away from New York to come to this small little town where there's a therapist he's going to work with, and his siblings are angry, everyone's angry at him, and the kid's not easy to be around. And one of the things we are so happy the writer put in and that we were able to do was to model the mother when the kid acted out and did something that any parent would be frustrated with. Instead of the mother screaming at the kid or saying, "Why did you do this?" The mother empathized and told him she loved him and she hoped his behavior would change, but this didn't mean, that some of what he was makes him the special person he was. And they put that in, and we were just like, yes, model that for a parent who might be watching it and has a kid who acts out and wants to scream at them or threaten them or punish them. But if they can think about being empathetic and being on their side a little bit, they're probably going to get much further with that kid and help that kid believe in themselves. So the more that we can see that on screen, and the more that characters can sort of be forgiving of themselves, hopefully more young people will be as well.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Debra Sloss. In today's program, we've been exploring the powerful role that cinema can play in shaping how we understand our emotions, relationships, and sense of self. We've also been hearing personal stories from community members about films that help them see something new about their own lives. With us is Dr. Yalda T. Uhls, founder of UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers, and a leading researcher studying the influence of media and storytelling on youth development. Every State of Mind episode includes a list of helpful resources. You can find resources related to media, storytelling, and mental health in today's show notes at stateofmindmedia.org. Now we hear from Patrice, who describes a moment in Annie Hall that helped her recognize a pattern in her own relationships that wasn't serving her. Sometimes a single scene can illuminate something about our lives we hadn't fully seen before and open the possibility for change. Here's Patrice's story.
I'm Patrice Vecchioni. In the summer of 1977, when I was 20, visiting family in New York City, I was going out with a guy I wasn't really into, but still there I was, and there we were walking along the streets of my beloved city. At the moment the sky opened up and thunder roared, as it does on the East Coast in summer. We happened to be in front of the Paris Theater on West 58th Street, just across from the Plaza Hotel. Annie Hall was starting soon, so we walked in. I'd been wanting to see that film. In those days, I was a young hippie girl adrift, living in Santa Cruz, still terribly missing the city my family had left when I was 8, feeling like neither a Californian nor a New Yorker, going out with guys I wasn't really into, one after another, having sex with them, often having sex I wasn't really into. That first time I saw Annie Hall, I fell hard for the movie. There was the scene when, before becoming submerged, a lobster crawls out of a pot of boiling water and gets behind the stove, and Woody Allen tries coaxing it out with a dish of drawn butter. Damn, did I laugh loudly, while the boy beside me barely cracked a smile. But the scene that really got to me, and I was too young for it to affect me so deeply, was when Diane Keaton and Woody Allen were having sex, and her true self slipped out of bed, sat on a chair, watched the couple going through their motions, took out a sketch pad, and began drawing. At 20, I knew just how she'd felt. I'd been having sex since I was 15, often for the wrong reasons. Some guys just wanted to get laid, while really, I just wanted to be loved. By conflating sex with love, I got disappointed over and over again and repeatedly felt used. You see, during those times of, quote, free love, there was an unspoken expectation that young women were supposed to want to do it all the time. Seeing Annie Hall remove herself to sit and do something she truly wanted to do was the all-too-quiet beginning of my own awakening. That was the first inkling I had that not all young women were who we were told we were supposed to be. A couple of years later, I gave up on men for a while. It wasn't till I'd begun learning how to say what was true for me, despite the consequences, that I was ready to go out with men again.
Thanks, Patrice. That moment in the film that Patrice describes sounds like it provided a critical turning point for her. What do you hear shifting inside of her?
You know, I think she was pretty clear about what was shifting was that she realized that the experience that she was having sexually, other women could be having as well. It's not something we talk about a lot in culture, even with our female friends. And so she saw this in this character and it resonated with her own experience. And it sounded like it shifted her to question why she was having sex with people and to really think more deeply about what she wanted out of these relationships. You know, certainly she also probably saw some representation of female power and also female lack of power. You know, if you, it's you know, definitely content reflects norms. And like, you know, a lot of people talk about That Girl being a really powerful show because it was like the first time, you know, before that there was Dick Van Dyke or Leave It to Beaver, where there were these families and or husband wives, and all the wives were homemakers. And then That Girl comes out and you see an independent woman who's working and you know, living her life. So this, you can really see how the world has evolved. We see it with same sex as well, relationships through the ages, and it often, when it's in these margins, you know, this time of intense social change, and stories and storytellers often want to reflect ahead, and they're reflecting the change, and many people are still in past ways of thinking, but they see these and it can help open them up to new ideas and new ways of being.
You know, earlier you talked about how stories and film can deliver messages when our defenses are down. So I asked this question in that context. But so what is it specifically about humor, like in a film like Annie Hall, that can make hard truths easier to recognize?
It's similar. It's your defense mechanisms are down. the moment is less intense because you can laugh about it. And, if you're laughing and you're recognizing yourself or recognizing an experience you have, but you're laughing about it, it makes you feel better about it, especially if it's a hard thing. You're like, well, there is some kind of justice or something around it that doesn't mean I'm bad, doesn't mean that this is something to be ashamed of. It's something that's actually funny. And I think humor can often point to really deep truths and hard truths in a way that drama might be much more challenging, just because it sort of lightens it and it opens you up more.
What makes a scene like the one that Patrice is describing stay with us in a way that actually changes us instead of just entertaining us? And given your background as an actual filmmaker in the past, I'm wondering what you would say about that.
Well, I think it's each of these clips, you've seen it. It's recognizing yourself in the character or in the situation. So there's something that resonates with your own experience and connects to your own meaning making that makes it stay with you.
Is there anything in the making of the film itself that lends itself more that way than not?
I mean, it depends on the storyteller, I mean, I think the best storytellers are the one that are trying to layer in meaning and theme and resonance to culture. But some people are just trying to tell an entertaining story, and it's ultimately not about the filmmaker or the person telling the story. It's about the audience and how they internalize it.
So are there a couple of resources that you'd want to mention to our listeners that you think would be useful for them to help them engage with media in a more meaningful way?
I would say there's Common Sense Media, which is a nonprofit that does ratings of content and offers parents questions to ask and talks about how it's developmentally appropriate. And also our site, scholarsandstorytellers.com. There's a lot of research. That race and class research study we did. Also, we talk about, we have a youth group where they talk about media and what they care about. Both of those resources might be helpful.
So what final thoughts would you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think in particular, I want to talk to the adults who are around young people. I think media and stories are really, really important for young people. They always have been. And often we as adults look at former generations younger generations in the media that they use, and we judge it because we didn't grow up with that kind of media. So right now it's social media and phones and AI. But be open, and they are growing up in this world where these new medias and new technologies are part of their lives, and trust that if you are in their lives and talking to them about values and being a good person and other things, and bringing your own sort of adult learning to their learning, that they'll make good choices with their media. Encourage the schools to teach media literacy. You can teach it as well. And I'll leave you with this. There was a media that adults were very, very upset about, and parents were upset about at the end of the 19th century, late 1800s. And I found a newspaper article speaking about it. It was basically books, novels. And this newspaper article said that that boys were in the library reading Horatio Alger, and who were their parents? Like, they should be outside. They shouldn't be reading. And now, of course, many of us wish our kids read more. But that was because dime novels, pulp novels had, gone everywhere, and kids were consuming the latest media, and grownups weren't as used to it, and they were judging. And we do the same today. So I would just say, please try to think about who you were as a kid and how our young people are going to need to use these media to shape their worlds and help them do it in a positive way.
Thank you, Dr. Uhls, for joining us and for sharing your insights. And now our final story is one I'm sharing myself. In it, I reflect on how the life of the protagonist in the film Amadeus, based on the life of composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, unexpectedly opened a door to a well of emotions I hadn't yet allowed myself to feel. The music you'll hear, Mozart's Fantasia in D minor, is performed by State of Mind's own Vijay Luca. Here's my story. I'm Debra Sloss. When I went to see the film Amadeus in 1984, I had just moved to Santa Cruz. I was expecting a beautiful period piece, extraordinary costumes, soaring music, and an evening of escapism. What I didn't expect was to have my world cracked open. As the film unfolded and Mozart slipped into illness, first physical, then a frenzied mental unraveling, I found myself tearing up, as I often do in films. But when I walked out of the theater and got into my car, I suddenly began to sob, the can't catch your breath kind. I didn't understand why I was so overwhelmed. I just knew it was about the year I had just lived through. Before moving to Santa Cruz, I'd been living in Los Angeles with my boyfriend, my first real love. He was handsome, tender, creative, and artistically talented. We were young, 18 and 21, engaged, dreaming of our future together, and enjoying a stability we both longed for. Then one morning, right after visiting us, his sister was in a devastating car accident. For nearly a month, she hovered between life and death, and we were at the hospital every day. His family had already lost multiple loved ones in car accidents. Trauma saturated their shared history, though at the time I didn't have that word for it. As his sister lay in a coma, his mother's demands on him grew more constant, more irrational. His parents' relationship was failing, and my boyfriend Ben began to unravel. He stopped sleeping, drove recklessly, shaved his head just to be able to breathe, quit his job with no plan. Suddenly, my waitressing wages were keeping us afloat, while I tried to stay in school, make rent, and make sense of what was happening. After his sister awoke from the coma, I told Ben I needed a break and went to stay with my parents, applied to the University of California at Santa Cruz, and got in. I invited Ben to come with me, but he felt obligated to go to the hospital daily to see his sister through her long recovery. I didn't think we were breaking up, just that we were each doing what we needed to. 8 months into our long-distance relationship, I ended it, taking with me grief and guilt about abandoning the sinking ship of his family, only to save myself. Watching Amadeus that night unleashed what I hadn't yet processed: the trauma, the fear, the grief for Ben's mental break and for the future we would not have together. Mozart's frantic descent mirrored what I had witnessed so intimately. I cried for Ben, for his family, for the double binds that trapped him, and for the creative spark in him that I had watched extinguish. It took years to fully understand what happened that night in the theater and in my car. The film had ignited the grief I'd buried in order to forge a future for myself. But Amadeus became my first real lesson in the mental health power of storytelling, how films can mirror our inner world, draw unspoken pain to the surface, and help us attend to what is in need of healing. You've been listening to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 I hope that in listening today, you might find yourself thinking about the films that have stayed with you over the years. Sometimes a single scene, a line, or a character can quietly shape how we understand ourselves, our relationships, or our hopes for the future. The stories we watch don't just entertain us. They can help us process emotions, make sense of difficult experiences, and sometimes even open the door to healing. So what will you be watching next? And what stories have shaped your life? A huge thank you to our guest, Dr. Yalda Uhls, and to our In Your Voice contributors, Melanie, Shep, Carolyn, Lillian, Patrice, and Debra, for sharing your beautiful and heartfelt film stories. And thanks to you for joining us. If you found today's show meaningful, you may also enjoy episode 83, How Stories Shape Our Mental Health, episode 54, The Healing Power of Making Art, and episode 86, Writing to Heal. New episodes of State of Mind come out the first Sunday of every month, and you can find our full archive at stateofmindmedia.org. If you'd like to stay connected to mental health conversation between episodes, please follow State of Mind on Facebook and Instagram at stateofmind.radio and podcast, where we share visual resources and ideas that build on the themes we discuss here. If this episode spoke to you, please take a moment to rate and review our show. Your feedback really does help others find these conversations and the support they may need. We want to hear from listeners and community members just like you. Share your story like today's contributors did by submitting an In Your Voice recording. Call in or record a short clip right on your phone about a mental health experience, recovery insight, or a resource that's helped you. Your story may be featured on a future episode. Submission details are at stateofmindmedia.org. Special thanks to our team, Vijay Luca and Austin Gautreaux for audio production, Evelyn Campbell for community coordination, Patrice Vecchione for In Your Voice story coaching, Tanmaya Kadamani and Nika Naik for transcriptions, Priscilla Yee and Grishma Jain for graphic design, Savinch Kozamova for marketing, Melanie Dominguez and Sarah Eisenberg for research. And thanks to musician Adrian Legg and Favored Nations Entertainment for our theme music. State of Mind was developed and originally broadcast in association with KSQD FM in Santa Cruz, California. Join us again next month for another episode of State of Mind. Until then, live well.